The Lagos night sky glittered, a canvas of 1,000 city lights, but for James, it was just a backdrop to his own emptiness. He stood on the rooftop, a handsome silhouette in a perfectly tailored black suit, the sounds of laughter and music from the party fading into a dull hum. He held a glass of champagne he hadn't touched, his gaze fixed on the sprawling, sparkling metropolis below. His friend Algu, a man whose smile was as infectious as the Afro beats pulsing from the speakers, slapped him on the back. "James, come on. The singer's performing live, and I swear she's been staring at you all night. Don't be a ghost at your own party." A smirk, cold and practiced, touched James's lips. "Let her stare, Algu. I'm not looking for anything." Algu sighed, a familiar note of friendly exasperation in his voice. "You never are. When did you become so cynical? You used to be the life of the party." "That was a long time ago," James said, his voice low. He turned his eyes back to the skyline. "Love's just a business deal with better lighting, a transaction where someone always loses." Algu half laughed, shaking his head. "You really don't believe in it, do you? Not even a little bit?" James's expression hardened. "Belief is for people who've never been betrayed. It's a luxury I can't afford." He turned and walked away, moving through the crowd without seeing them. Just as he reached the edge of the rooftop, a cascade of fireworks exploded behind him, painting the sky in brilliant reds and golds. The camera would have captured a man surrounded by celebration, yet utterly alone, his face a mask of profound loneliness. The next day, the brilliant Lagos sun beat down on the chaotic streets of Yaba. James drove himself, the windows of his black Range Rover sealed against the symphony of blaring horns and street vendors. He navigated the traffic with an autopilot's precision, his mind a world away. Then, his eyes snagged on a figure by the roadside. A girl, sitting with her back against a grimy wall, her bare feet tucked under a torn dress. She was hugging her knees, her face a portrait of exhaustion, yet marked by a strange, unyielding calm. Her name, though he didn't know it yet, was Amara. Time seemed to bend and slow. The noise of the city dissolved. He saw only her. A whisper escaped his lips, barely audible even to himself. "What are you doing here?" It wasn't a question for her, but for the universe. He shook his head, forcing himself to look away, to keep driving. But the image of her face was burned into his mind. His heart, a muscle he'd trained to be still, began to pound. It was an unfamiliar, unsettling rhythm. Unable to shake the feeling, he made a sharp turn, wrestling the large vehicle around and drove back. The spot where she'd sat was now empty. He pulled over and rolled down the window, calling to a nearby vendor. "Excuse me. There was a girl sitting here a while ago, barefoot in torn clothes. Have you seen her?" The vendor, a woman with a weary but kind face, shrugged. "Oga, plenty people sit here every day. I no sabi who you dey talk about." James exhaled, a wave of frustration washing over him. He stared at the empty spot on the pavement, a silent beat passing as he wrestled with a feeling he couldn't name. Finally, he drove away, but his carefully constructed peace was shattered. That night, sleep offered no escape. He tossed and turned in his vast empty mansion, the cool silk sheets providing no comfort. Her image flashed in his mind again and again, the quiet dignity in her tired eyes. He sighed, sitting up and rubbing his temples. "Why can't I forget her?" he muttered into the darkness. The glowing hands of the clock on his bedside table read 5 a.m. Defeated, he grabbed his keys and headed out into the pre-dawn quiet. He parked his car across the road from the spot, a silent sentinel waiting for the city to wake. As the sun began to cast its first golden rays, the streets slowly came to life. And then he saw her. Amara appeared, walking with a purpose that belied her circumstances, clutching a small, worn satchel. James stepped out of his car, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Hey!" he called out, his voice softer than he'd intended. She stopped, her body instantly tense, her eyes wide with a familiar fear. She looked up at him, a cornered animal ready to flee. "Please," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't want any trouble." "You're not in trouble," James said quickly, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. I saw you yesterday. I just wanted to talk." Her suspicion was a wall between them. "Why?" He gave her the only answer he had, the honest one. "I don't know. Maybe because I couldn't stop thinking about you." A long pause stretched between them. She studied his face, searching for a lie, for the hidden angle. But his sincerity was disarming. The tension in her shoulders eased just a fraction. "My name's Amara." A small, genuine smile touched James's lips. "James, it's nice to meet you, Amara." They ended up in a small, clean cafe, a world away from the rooftop parties and boardrooms James frequented. The waitress brought them tea and bread. Amara sat stiffly, her senses on high alert. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her gaze direct. "Maybe because it feels right," he answered simply. She let out a small, bitter laugh. "You dress like someone who owns half the city. People like you don't do things because they feel right. What do you really want?" "Just conversation," he said, his voice earnest. "No conditions, no games." She exhaled slowly, her eyes dropping to the cup of tea. She took a slow, deliberate sip. The silence that fell between them was soft, not awkward. "I don't take charity," she finally said, her voice low but firm. "If you want to help, give me a job. Anything honest. I can cook, I can clean, whatever you need." James was taken aback. "You'd rather work than accept help?" Her eyes met his, and for the first time he saw the steel beneath her vulnerability. "Dignity's the only thing I have left. I won't lose that, too." He nodded, a profound sense of respect settling over him. He was quietly, deeply moved. "All right, then," he said. "I own a few places. You can work as my cook. I'll pay you fairly and you'll have a safe place to stay." Amara was stunned, her mouth slightly agape. "You'd really do that? For a stranger?" "Everyone deserves a fresh start," James replied. She lowered her eyes, a wave of emotion making them glisten. That night, Amara stepped hesitantly into the quiet, elegant guest house on James's property. It was a home, not just a house. "Don't worry," James said from the doorway. "This is your home now." The word home hung in the air. She froze, a concept so foreign it felt like a dream. Then she slowly nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. The elderly caretaker, Clara, greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome, dear. Come, I'll show you to your room." A montage began, not for a film, but in James's memory. Amara exploring the kitchen, her fingers tracing the clean countertops, her arranging utensils with a quiet focus, a faint, genuine smile gracing her lips for what looked like the first time in years. The next evening, the smell of jollof rice and fried plantain filled the main house. James walked in, stopping in his tracks. "You made all this?" "Yes, sir," Amara said, her voice soft. "I hope it's okay." He took a bite. He paused, his fork hovering in the air. An unexpected wave of emotion hit him. It tasted of his childhood, of a time before the betrayals and the cynicism. "This tastes like home," he said, his voice thick. "Thank you." She smiled then, a soft, proud smile that lit up her entire face. Days melted into weeks. Amara moved through the house with a quiet grace, watering the plants in the garden, humming softly while she swept, cooking meals that seemed to heal a part of James he didn't know was broken. He started coming home earlier, finding excuses to sit in the kitchen while she worked, the comfortable silence punctuated by the chop of a knife or the sizzle of a pan. They exchanged small smiles. A subtle warmth began to build between them, thawing the frost around his heart. One evening, he watched from his balcony as she knelt by the flower beds, whispering softly to the roses as she watered them. Clara, the caretaker, passed by with a basket of laundry. "Sir," she said, her old eyes wise, "she has a pure heart. Be careful. That kind of heart can change anyone." James smiled faintly but said nothing. He already knew it was too late. The next morning, as Amara served him pap and akara, he gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit. Let's eat together." She looked shocked. "I can't, sir. You're my boss." "You're more than that," he said, his gaze holding hers. She hesitated, then slowly, uncertainly, sat down. They shared a quiet laugh over the thickness of the pap, and in that simple moment, the air shifted. The boss-employee dynamic dissolved, replaced by something soft, intimate, and impossibly innocent. That night, a storm broke over Lagos. Thunder rattled the windows. James found Amara in the kitchen, frantically placing bowls to catch the drips from a leaking roof. He rushed in. "Let me help." She looked up, a smile playing on her lips. "You'll ruin your expensive shoes." "They'll survive," he laughed, grabbing a bucket. They worked together, their laughter mixing with the sound of the storm. A pause, a sudden silence in their movements. The sound of the rain filled the room. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and in that gaze, 1,000 unspoken words were exchanged. It was a look of pure understanding. The following morning, James handed her a small, neatly wrapped box. "What's this?" she asked, her brows furrowed. "A dress. For you," he said. "No strings attached. Just gratitude." "I can't accept this," she started, but he gently interrupted. "Please, I insist." She carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a simple but elegant gown, the color of a twilight sky. Her eyes watered. "Thank you, James." The way she said his name, without the formal sir, was a gift in itself. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, they walked in the garden. Amara wore the gown, and she looked like she belonged among the roses. "You know," James began, his voice quiet, "I used to think love was a trick, a weakness." Amara smiled. "Maybe it was the kind you knew. Not the real one." "And what's the real one?" he asked, genuinely curious. She looked up at him, her dark eyes full of a wisdom that belied her years. "The kind that makes you better, not weaker." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and felt something shift inside him, a final wall crumbling to dust. Weeks later, he set up a quiet dinner on his rooftop. No party, no crowd. Just a simple table, 2 chairs, and a few candles flickering against the Lagos skyline. "You didn't have to do this," Amara said, her eyes wide. "I wanted to," he replied, his voice full of a new kind of certainty. "For the first time in my life, I don't want to impress anyone. I just want to be real." He reached across the table and gently took her hand. "Amara, you changed me. You reminded me that life isn't about control. It's about connection." Her fingers tightened around his. "And you showed me that kindness still exists." They shared a long, silent look, the city lights twinkling below them like fallen stars. And then, a small, hopeful smile bloomed on both of their faces. The sun rose over Lagos, casting a warm, golden light over the garden. Amara was watering the plants, a serene smile on her face. James walked out onto the veranda, carrying 2 cups of tea. He stopped beside her. "Good morning." She turned, her smile widening as she saw him. "It is now." They stood there together, sipping their tea in the quiet of the new day. The chaotic, bustling city seemed a world away. There was no need for grand declarations or fireworks. There was only this, a shared peace, a quiet understanding, and a love that had been reborn in the simplest of ways. True love doesn't ask what you have. It asks who you are. James sat in his penthouse office, the city lights of Lagos twinkling below like a scattered handful of diamonds. He ended a call, a triumphant smile spreading across his face as he turned to Amara, who was curled up on the sofa, nursing a cup of herbal tea. "Finalize it," he'd said into the phone. "We'll announce the new charity fund next week." He hung up, his eyes sparkling with an excitement that went beyond any business deal he'd ever closed. He looked at Amara, the woman who had unknowingly turned his world upside down and set it right again. "Guess who's officially opening a school for underprivileged kids?" he asked, his voice warm. Amara's face lit up, her grin infectious. "You are," she said, her voice filled with pride. James shook his head, moving to sit beside her on the sofa. He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "We are," he corrected softly. "You inspired it. This is our project." They clinked their teacups together, the soft chime a quiet celebration of their shared dream. In that moment, surrounded by the sterile luxury of his apartment, they shared a profound sense of connection, a silent promise of a future they would build together, one brick of kindness at a time. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated pride and affection, a bubble of peace in a world that was about to test them. Later that evening, the bubble burst. The soft murmur of a television gossip channel played in the background as they ate dinner, a jarring counterpoint to their quiet intimacy. Suddenly, their faces appeared on the screen. A slick, overly enthusiastic reporter's voice cut through the air. "Billionaire James Adedeji seen with mystery woman," the voice declared over footage of them leaving a restaurant. "Sources say she once lived on the streets. Who is she, and what hold does she have on one of Lagos's most eligible bachelors?" Amara froze, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. Her plate felt suddenly heavy in her lap. The food she'd been enjoying now tasted like ash. "They're talking about me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. James's jaw tightened. With a swift movement, he grabbed the remote and silenced the television, plunging the room into an abrupt, tense quiet. "Let them talk," he said, his voice firm, trying to project a confidence he knew she needed. "They don't know you. They don't know us." But the damage was done. Amara looked at him, her eyes clouded with a familiar pain he had worked so hard to erase. "They'll judge you because of me," she said, her hurt palpable. "Your partners, your investors, your family. They'll think you've lost your mind." James moved closer, cupping her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Then let them," he insisted, his voice dropping to an intense, earnest whisper. "You're my choice, Amara, not my business strategy, not a PR move. You. Do you understand?" She looked at him, a battle raging within her. Part of her desperately wanted to believe his powerful words, to find shelter in his conviction. But another, older part, the part that had learned to survive on the harsh streets, feared that the storm heading their way was one even he couldn't control. The storm arrived at the annual high-profile charity gala a week later. It was the glittering pinnacle of the Lagos social scene, a room filled with old money, new power, and an army of cameras ready to capture every triumph and misstep. Amara stood beside James, a vision of grace in a simple but elegant gown. Yet she felt like an imposter. The whispers followed them like a shadow as they moved through the crowd. "That's the girl," a woman murmured behind her fan. "He could have had anyone," her companion replied, not bothering to lower her voice. "A senator's daughter was interested, you know." James heard every word, his grip on Amara's hand tightening instinctively. He leaned in, his voice a private anchor in the sea of judgment. "You belong here as much as I do," he said, his eyes locking with hers. A small, defiant smile touched Amara's lips. "Maybe even more," she replied softly, her own strength beginning to surface. "At least my heart is clean." They shared a look, a silent pact of solidarity. But across the room, a pair of cold, calculating eyes watched them. Jessica, James's ex-fiancée, a woman carved from ice and ambition, observed their every move, her lips curled into a disdainful sneer. Later, in a quieter corridor backstage, Jessica made her move. She cornered James while Amara was speaking with a charity organizer. "So this is the new you?" she began, her voice dripping with condescension. "Falling for someone from the street? How very novel. Is this your latest philanthropic project?" James remained calm, refusing to rise to her bait. He looked at her, seeing not the woman he once thought he'd marry, but a stranger fueled by bitterness. "Her heart's cleaner than most boardrooms I've been in," he stated simply, his words a quiet rebuke. Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh. "You're throwing your reputation away for a fairy tale, James. Your family is mortified. The board is questioning your judgment." James's expression didn't flicker. "My reputation can rebuild itself. It's just money and opinions," he said, his voice hard as steel. "But I won't go back to rebuilding a broken soul again, especially not my own." Jessica's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of fury. She glared at him, then turned and walked away, her departure a silent threat. That night, the weight of it all became too much for Amara. The whispers, the stares, Jessica's venom, they chipped away at the new foundation of her confidence. She sat alone in her room, staring at her reflection in the large, ornate mirror. The woman looking back at her was wearing beautiful clothes, living in a palace, but her eyes held the old, familiar fear. "Maybe I'm not enough," she whispered to her reflection. "Maybe love isn't enough to bridge a gap this wide." A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent admission of defeat. With a heavy heart, she quietly pulled a small, worn bag from the back of the closet and began to pack. James woke to an unnerving silence. The house felt hollow, empty. A sense of dread washed over him as he walked to her room and found the bed perfectly made, untouched. On the pillow lay a single sheet of paper. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up. "Thank you for everything," the note read in her neat script. "You showed me a world I never dreamed of. But you deserve someone who matches your world, not someone who complicates it. Amara." The words struck him like a physical blow. He stood frozen for a moment, the note crinkling in his fist, before a surge of adrenaline propelled him into action. He grabbed his keys and rushed out, his heart pounding with a singular, desperate thought: find her. He drove to the one place his heart told him she would be. He found her walking along the same crowded, bustling street where he had first met her a lifetime ago. The vendors, the faces she had known for years, recognized her. "Sister, you done come back?" one called out, a mix of surprise and sympathy in his voice. Amara offered a sad, fleeting smile. "Just passing through," she replied, her voice thick with unshed tears. Just then, a sleek car screeched to a halt beside her. James leaped out, his hair disheveled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Don't you dare walk away again," he said, his voice raw with emotion. Tears finally spilled from Amara's eyes. "James, this world, your world, it's not made for people like me," she cried, gesturing to the chaotic street around them. "I'll only ever be your charity case, the girl from the streets." James closed the distance between them, his gaze intense and unwavering. "Then we'll make our own world," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction above the street noise. "One where love isn't decided by headlines or balance sheets. One where all that matters is what's in here." He gently placed a hand over her heart. She tried to speak, to protest, but he pulled her into a fierce, desperate hug. The street noise, the vendors, the curious onlookers. It all faded away. There was only the feeling of his arms around her and the soft patter of rain beginning to fall, washing the city clean. 6 months later, the world looked very different. The montage of their life was no longer one of whispers and scandal, but of purpose and joy. James and Amara, now husband and wife, ran their new school together. The gossip channels had moved on, replaced by news reports praising their work. The Adedeji Foundation has opened 3 schools in rural Lagos, a reporter announced, led by James and his wife, Amara, whose personal journey has inspired the foundation's new mission. The camera cut to a shot of Amara teaching a group of laughing children under the shade of a large mango tree, the same kind she once sat beneath alone, dreaming of a better life. James watched from a distance, his heart swelling with a pride that no corporate merger could ever match. One evening, they held a small celebration at the school. Lanterns glowed, candles flickered, and the children sang songs, their voices filled with hope. Amara stood before the small crowd of students, parents, and teachers to give a short speech. "Years ago, I thought life had forgotten me," she began, her voice steady and clear. "But then someone saw me, not for what I had or didn't have, but for who I was. And I learned that's all any of us really need, to be seen." As applause filled the warm night air, James stepped up beside her, taking her hand. "She's the reason I understand love now," he told the crowd, his gaze fixed on his wife. "The real kind. The kind that builds, not breaks." The children cheered, their joy a pure and perfect validation of their journey. They shared a look, this time completely unafraid. Later, they sat together on the school's rooftop, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. The sounds of children playing drifted up from the courtyard below. "Remember the night you told me love was like a business deal?" Amara asked, a playful smile on her face. James laughed softly, a rich, genuine sound. "Yeah, I was wrong," he admitted, shaking his head. "It's the only investment that never fails." Amara leaned her head on his shoulder. "As long as it's real," she added quietly. He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Ours is," he whispered, his voice full of certainty. "Always will be." The camera pulled back, showing the two of them silhouetted against the sunset, a beacon of hope above the school they built together, a testament to a love that had found its true worth, not in boardrooms or headlines, but in the simple act of building a better world.